Okay, so tonight what I want to talk to you about is putting a skeleton inside your character. Last week we talked about blend shapes. You get the shape editor, you got your blend shapes in, or you made copies of them and did it that way. Whichever way is fine. They both lead to the same result. So as soon as there we go, much better. Okay. So remember I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that both blend shapes and a skeleton are deformers. They're deformation animation. What you're doing is you're taking the model and you're, for lack of a better term, deforming it in some way in order to get the result that you want. Blend shapes are great for small focused areas like on the face, but we want to have a little bit of flexibility and make it easier on ourselves when we're moving large parts of the body like the arms and the legs and the back. So we're going to use a skeleton instead. I'm going to go ahead and open up a guy here. This is just a character. He's just a really simple guy. He's not intended to be used for anything other than this demonstration. He's also up on the website, so if you want to practice some of these things before you dig in, you're welcome to do that. So we're going to use this guy here in a few minutes, and I'll show you how to put a skeleton in a character. The first thing, though, is I want to talk a little bit about what joints do, what skeletons do. We need rigging. So we're going to be in the rigging menu set. So in your upper left drop down, you want to switch to the rigging menu set. Come over here to the board, so you won't be able to see it in the video, but there we are. So what we're creating inside Maya is a series of joints, and they look something like this, like a circle with a little plus inside it. It's actually a sphere that has 3 axes showing. And we're going to create a chain of these to control any aspect of our character that we want to control. In between the joints, we have bones, and bones are just connective devices that show us the hierarchy of the skeleton. So if this was in the arm, this might be the shoulder, and then this might be the elbow, and then this might be the wrist. A little spike in his head. It's a very long neck. There we go. There. So we'd have a shoulder joint and a elbow joint, and a wrist joint, and then we'd have some more down here. We'd have a hand joint and fingers and on and on. The thing that's important to know is that this is a hierarchical relationship. So if I rotate the shoulder joint, the elbow, the wrist, the hand are all going to go along to the right. They're going to, if I rotate, just like you do, if I rotate my shoulder down, my elbow and my wrist, all that come down too. They don't just stay floating up in the air. But I can also take my elbow and bend it and not affect my shoulder at all. And that's the same thing here. If we rotate the elbow joint, the shoulder joint will stay where it is, but the wrist and the hand will come with it. So it is a hierarchical relationship. There are ways to reorder that hierarchy, and we'll talk about those next week. And there are reasons why you'd want to do that. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and keep everything in a hierarchical relationship, or as they say in 3D, we're going to use forward kinematics. So put that down, forward, word, kinematics. And all this means is that when you rotate the shoulder joint, the elbow, the wrist, and everything go with it. There's another technique called inverse kinematics where you can reorder things and have a hierarchy that is different than what the joints actually show. And we'll talk about that next one. So to create a skeleton is relatively simple. Again, we're going to be in the rigging menu set. And right up here, we've got a skeleton menu. We're going to click on that. And we're going to select create joints. And again, we always want to, if we see an option box, I always want to kind of click on it, make sure everything's fine, especially in here because people may have reset things. So we're going to reset the tool. Everything looks fine. We'll close that. And then to create our joint hierarchy, all we need to do is click in the window. I'm clicking and holding right now to place this joint where I want it. And then when I let go, it creates a joint. And I click and hold up here. And you can see that it automatically creates next joint for me. Now, when I do the next one, what I want you to do is watch this joint right here. So I'm coming up here and watch that little plus sign. I'm up here, and then when I let go, see how it flipped? See how it reordered itself a little bit? When you're creating a joint chain, what Maya's automatically going to do is it's going to orient one of the axes for the joint down the length of the bone. And what that allows us to do is to grab that joint and rotate it around that axis so that you can do things like this. You can take your wrist and flip the hand over without the arm going crazy, right? So I can go like this, and because that axis is pointed down the bone, then we're good. I'll put another one in here. What that means is when you're creating your joint chain, however many joints you need, let's say I needed this many joints. 1, 2, 3, 4. I need 5 joints in this chain for whatever reason. I always have to add one more at the end in order to get this last usable joint oriented down the length of the chain. Now, I haven't created anything yet because I'm just placing joints. If I hit the delete key, I can back up down the chain to where I want to take another run at it, and then I can put my joints in again, and Maya will reorient them for me. And once I'm done, I just hit return, and now I have a joint chain. And if I grab this one here, I can rotate it on the X. If I want to rotate, I'm sorry, that wasn't the X, that's the Y. Rotating on on the Z, my bad. Rotating on the Z. If I want to rotate down the length of the joint, I can just grab this control right here. And you can see that spins around, just like I just demonstrated with my actual own arm. If I grab this one and rotate it, you can see all the ones that are below it in the chain. So it's a hierarchy. This is the highest point in the hierarchy. This is the lowest point. Every joint in the hierarchy that's below this joint is going to rotate. Make sense? All right, terrific. So, let's open our guy back up here. And I'm going to set his view, shading rather, to X-ray so that we can see through him. And I'm going to do that on this one too. X-ray. Wireframe on shaded. You always want to have the wireframe on when you're placing your joints because the joints rotate wherever they're placed, and you want to place them on an edge loop so that when you rotate, that edge loop is effective. I'll show you what I mean here in a minute. So there's a preferred hierarchy when you're building a skeleton. Generally speaking, and there are exceptions, but 99% of the time, 95% of the time maybe, when you're building a skeleton for a character, you always want to start with the pelvis. You always want to start in that region because that's where most of our motion impetus comes from. It comes from the hips and the pelvis. Everything reports into that, and then you can move that by itself, and everything will move with it. Or you can move away from it and affect other parts of the character, and the pelvis will just stay there. But we always want to start with the pelvis. That's always the highest point in any bipedal. These are bipedal characters, by the way. Quadrupeds have different demands, so we're only going to be talking about bipeds. But we always want to start with the pelvis. When you're placing joints, there are two things to remember. One is you always want to use the view where you get the best idea of what the geometry actually looks like in terms of where you're going to place the joints. And then the other thing that you want to remember is you always want to, when you're creating your joint chain, you're going to create the entire chain in the view that you select. You're not going to switch between views. The reason you want to switch between views is it changes the orientation of the joints. So if you got, let's say you got an x-axis that runs down the center of your bone in the side view, and then you go to the front view to put in a joint, the x-axis may no longer be that centerline rotation axis, and that makes animators very cranky. They expect things to all work the same. So one of the ways you can do that, and you can always change the orientation of the joint the joint axes, but that's an extra step that's eliminated if you just take your best shot at a particular view and put the joints in that view, and then you can always adjust them. So we're going to look at these three views here. Wireframe unshaded and X-ray. Great. I'm going to X-ray you too. All right. So if we're going to start a skeleton here for our character. And we want to start with the pelvis. That joint chain usually goes from the pelvis up through the top of the head. So if we're going to do that, which of these views might be the best one for that? Which one's going to show us the most amount of detail in terms of where we want to place those joints? Bottom left? Bottom right? Who says bottom left? Tell me why.
I can see two shoulder. I can imagine two shoulder joints and two hip bone joints.
Okay, but we're not doing shoulders and hips right now. We're doing spine. I'm sorry? Bottom right. Yeah, bottom right is correct. You could certainly do it over here. But you run a couple of risks. One is you could go straight up or as straight as possible. But when you're doing this, you're doing it freehand, and you're never quite going to line these things up perfectly. And you could end up with a little bit of a wiggle in this spine, which could make it tough to animate. The other thing you don't get here is the curvature of the back. Remember, our spine runs along the back of our body, and we want to make sure that we, in most cases, not always, sometimes you run the spine right up the center of the character, but in most cases you want to mimic what our actual spine does. So the choice for a spine really is the side view. So we're going to get this. We're going to go back up here to skeleton and create joints. And I'm going to place my first joint down here in the pelvis. And then I'm probably going to want at least 2 or 3 joints coming up the back here. Remember, I want to place my joints on edge loops so that when they rotate, they're rotating and they're deforming at that edge loop. So we just come here and we'll place one here and maybe one there. And maybe I'll skip this one and come up here, maybe back over there. And then I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to go to the base of the neck. And we can go in the center there because your neck kind of goes forward and back from the same place. Base of the head is for the same reason. And then, like I mentioned a minute ago, even though this is the last joint we're going to rotate, we need one more to orient this joint along the x-axis. So we're going to come up here to the top of the head and we're going to put it right on top of his head like that, like a little ping pong ball or a beanie with a little pom-pom on top. And with all that stuff in place, we're going to hit enter, or return rather, and there we are. Now we've got our spine all set to go. You always want to check these from another view. So we're going to check here from the front view, and we have a little bit of a problem, right? That first joint is actually outside the body, and that happens sometimes. It's a little tough to tell exactly, you know, where the legs are, where the legs end and the torso begins. But this doesn't look like a pelvis joint. It looks like something entirely different, and we want to get rid of that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select this joint, get our move tool, and just move it up a little bit so that the joint itself is inside the body. And what that does, though, is it takes all of our other joints and messes with them. So we're going to have to adjust them, and we can just take this joint, bring it back down here, and that should straighten things out. And we're good to go. So there's our first joint chain. It's always a good idea to rename these as you go, because you're going to have to access them as you're animating, and it just numbers sequentially as you make them. So, you know, joint 36 is not necessarily a descriptive name, but if it says right shoulder, you know exactly what it is. So this would be spine 1 and spine 2. And spine 3 and spine 4. Whoops, no, that's not spine 4, is it? Neck. My bad. By the way, in any joint chain, you can use the up and down. Once you're there, you can use the up and down arrows to move up and down the joint chain. So the up, I'm using the up arrow right now. Even though it's going down his body, it's going up the hierarchy. Does that make sense? We're good? It looks like you're shaking your head no.
You're good. Press up and it still goes down.
No, when you press up, it's going up the joint hierarchy. It's not going up the physical character. It's moving up the hierarchy, right? So the top joint in this hierarchy is here at the pelvis. So when I hit the up arrow, it's going to move up towards that. Even though it's moving down through the body, we don't really care about that. We want to move, you know, in this case, as I'm naming, I want to move down because I want to name things as I go. So this would be head, and then one more down. And it can be a little disorienting at first, but you'll get the hang of it. And then I usually call this one head end. So that this one we don't really do anything with. Its only purpose is to orient that previous joint in the chain. It doesn't serve any purpose really other than that. And Maya is smart enough to exclude it from our joint listing when we skin the character, and we'll do that later on today. Okay. So there's our spine, neck, and head joint. And that works great. Okay, so next up we're going to do a leg. So which view should we use for the leg?
Bottom left.
Sorry?
Bottom left.
Bottom left. Why bottom left?
You can see both feet.
I can't hear you, man.
Because you can see both feet from the front.
You see both feet from the front. Okay. All right. I can see, you know, how that might be a way to go. What about the ankle? What about the toe? Right? So again, our side view, our bottom right or our side view is the best one to go with because we can put the joints down here. We can go ankle, we can go to the toe, and then we can go out. And we don't have to guess where those will go. Plus, it's going to give us a nice straight group of joints which is important when we hook up the IK, the inverse kinematics on the feet. So I'm going to get my tool back. And to get my tool back, I'm just going to hit Y. And that gives me back the last tool that I used, which was the joint tool. I'll put a joint here in the hip. Put one in the knee. The knee rotates more from the front than it does from the back, so I'm going to cheat it towards the front. By the way, if I click and hold, I can drag this around as much as I want. And as soon when I let go of it, it's going to place that joint. And then the ankle goes into the center. And again, if I don't like where those are, I can just hit the delete key to back up and then replace them. Go there, and then we're going to go to the toe right there, and then again, one at the very end to orient that joint, and that's the toe end, and we're good to go. Return, and we have our joint chain. So it's right there in our leg, right? Let's say this is the left leg. So this would be hip, left, oops, hip, left. And this one, we can hit the down key and have it actually physically go down through the body. Knee left, ankle left, toe left, toe end left. Okay. So let's take a look where this is. Ah, look at that. Not even close, right? So what Maya does is, you always want to place joints, by the way, you always want to place joints in an orthographic view. You never want to do it in a perspective view. Because even though it's a three-dimensional view, we still only have a two-dimensional interface. We're only seeing it in the height and the width. So Maya can't really tell where in that depth space you want the joint to go. So you're always going to be working in these orthographic views when you're placing your joints. And what it will do is it'll take your input as far as which of the two axes you're working with. So in the side view, we're working with the Y and the Z. So it was happy to take our Y and Z information, but it just assumed that everything else on the x-axis was going to happen on the 0 axis, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. All we need to do is just click this and bring this over here, just drop it inside the middle of our leg, and we're good to go. Now, eventually, we're going to connect this up to our pelvis. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. But we have another leg to do, right? Copy paste. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to grab this hierarchy, and we're going to go to skeleton, and we're going to use mirror joints. And here's why you want to rename stuff as you go, because it gets really, really handy. We're going to go mirror joints, and we're going to hit the option box. And it wants to know which axis we're going to mirror across. So we'll look down here at our widget. And we want it to mirror across this vertical axis, right? So that would be the YZ axis. Those two axes create this vertical line. So we're going to hit YZ. And under mirror function, we want to mirror the behavior. Because when we grab that hand and rotate it forward on one side, we want to be able to grab it and rotate it forward on the other side the same way. If we mirror the behavior, those two sides wouldn't match. If I rotate in the positive Y to bring the wrist forward on the left side, for example, I would have to rotate on the negative Y if it's mirroring the orientation in order to get the wrist to come forward. And again, that's one of those things that slows you down when you're animating because you have to remember which one does which. It can be very frustrating. So you mirror behavior, and then it will, the same rotational value, positive or negative, will be applied to each of those joints regardless of which side of the character it's on. Now here's the really handy bit. Replacement names for duplicated joints. Notice how I put left in that name for all those joints. I did LT. So if I do a search here for LT and replace it with RT and mirror those joints, look at here. Hip RT or hip right, knee right. ankle right, toe end right. So that's the advantage of renaming your joints as you go, because then when you mirror them over, those names are already in. You don't have to type them in again. And this will function exactly the same way. We'll go here so that you can see what I mean. I grab this joint, and I'm going to get the y-axis rotation here. I pull down, and that knee goes backwards. If I grab this one, and I pull down, the knee goes backwards. So that's mirroring the behavior so that it does the same thing. Okay, so our legs are done. Now we just have to do our arms. Which view is best for the arms?
Top left.
You got a 33% chance of being right. There's only 3 of them. Top left? Why top left?
See the wrist.
You see shoulders and wrists and elbows.
See the shoulders and wrists and elbows?
Fingers.
Yeah, but you can see all that stuff here too, can't you?
Bottom left.
Hmm?
Bottom left.
Don't let me talk you out of your answer. Just asking a question. You're actually right. It's the top left. And why? Because of the hand, the fingers, right? Yeah, we can see the fingers here. Can we tell exactly where they are in space? No, just like we can't tell where the ankle is here in this view. So we'll come in here. We'll get our tool again. We want to put in a clavicle joint. It's called a clavicle joint. It's misnamed. Our clavicle is the collarbone. But the thing that actually rotates our shoulder up past about here is our scapula in the back. Once your arm gets to about here, if you keep raising it up, it's the scapula in the back that starts bringing that arm up. Your shoulder ends rotating right about there. If you've ever seen somebody who just had a shoulder joint was rotating the arm up to above the head using just a shoulder joint, you've got the neck comes down, then the shoulder goes straight out, and then the arm juts up, and you're like, wow, that looks terrible. And you may not know why. It's because they didn't have a scapula bringing that up. So, because if you bring your arm all the way up, your shoulder ends up touching your ear, right? You're reaching up like this, your shoulder could easily touch your ear, which means that it's not doing the rotation. But at some point, when they started doing these, they called it a clavicle. So that's what we do. Get our tool again. We'll come in here. You want to be sure you don't click on any of these other joints, because if you click on it, you'll be adding an extension to that joint chain. So just find a location that's fairly well away, right about. And you can even put it in the back, because that's really what we're talking about. Put it right there, and then we'll put one at the shoulder, right about there. And we'll put one at the elbow, towards the back. Put one at the wrist. By the way, these are looking pretty big. So if I start coming down here and doing the fingers, these are going to start overlapping each other. If you want to change the visual size of these joints, you go to Display, Animation, and Joint Size, and it gives you this little slider window. And you can just grab this slider and move it up or down depending on how big or how small you want your joints to be. It doesn't do anything to the way that the joints manipulate the character. It just changes their visual size. Something I said? People getting up, walking out. All right, so there's our wrist. Now we want to come down to the fingers and the thumb. So we'll, whoops. And here we go. So I'm going to come down here. Oh, no, wrong. All right. Just delete that. Let's start over. So we'll come back up here. Here's our clavicle joint. Boom. Shoulder joint. And you don't have to nail it at the very first try. You know, again, if you click and hold, you can drag things around. You can really place it. And if it doesn't quite work out, then you can always, you know, back up using the delete key and replace them. So now we're at the wrist. We'll come down here into this finger and a finger there, and then we're going to come out to the end to orient that joint, that last joint that orients. Now we want the other fingers to come off of the wrist as well. So I'm just going to hit the up key a couple of times. 1, 2, 3. I'm back at the wrist joint, and then when I continue on, it knows that I want to have that wrist joint be the parent of this other set of finger joints. And I'll back up again, and then we'll come to here, and we'll come to here, and we'll come to here, and that looks pretty good, and we'll hit return. And we're good to go. So there's our arm joint chain. And we'll look again, and once again, it's taken the in this case the y-x coordinates that excuse me, the xz coordinates that we created for the arm, and put everything else on the 0 y-axis. So we can take the parent here and just bring it up into the arm. Now if we come in tight here, you can see the fingers are kind of sticking out of the model a little bit. We don't want those there. We always want the joints inside the geometry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here into my perspective view, because this, once the joints are created, I can move them around in the perspective view without any fear of having anything weird happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this joint here, and I'm going to rotate it down a little bit. And we'll take this joint here. Whoops. We'll take this joint here. I'm coming around so I can see it a little better. And we'll rotate it down a little bit so it's in the middle of the fingers. And then the thumb's in pretty good shape. Probably want to bring that down just a little. What I could do, because it's kind of riding high, even though the angle is correct, it's a little bit high in the thumb, what I could do is just take this, bring it down a little, and then we're good. And then to get the other arm going, we just grab this guy and skeleton, mirror joints. All of our stuff was set up previously, so we're good to go. Now, here's why you rename. Here we didn't rename, right? So we started out with joint 1, joint 2, joint 3, joint 4, etc., etc. Up here, here's our shoulder joint. Joint 27, joint 2, joint 3, joint 4. So we're going to have multiple joints named joint 1, joint 2, or joint 2 on. And if you ever need to grab these real quick for any reason, you're not going to know what they are. So make sure you rename your joints as you go, and you'll be good. Okay. So now what we need to do is connect all this stuff up. We want to make sure that everything is in one hierarchy and things are connected correctly to the things that they need to be connected to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent these objects together. Parenting is a way that we show a hierarchical relationship between these. In fact, what the joint tool has done is automatically created a parent-child relationship between these joints as we created them. So that's what the bone means. The big end of the bone, it's sort of a pyramid shape. The big end of the bone is at the parent joint, and the pointy end of the bone, the tip of the pyramid, is at the child. So what we want to do now is we want to connect the legs to the pelvis, and we're going to connect the arms up to the top of the spine. So the way parenting works is really pretty straightforward. We select the child joint first, then we shift select the parent joint, not that. I'm going to do that again. Child joint first, shift select the parent joint, and then just hit the P key on the keyboard. and it creates a parent-child relationship. You see we've got the big end of the bone up here by the pelvis, the small end of the bone down by the hip. Same thing here. Child first, parent, hit P. Now our legs are connected into our pelvis. If we take our pelvis and rotate it, you see the legs go with it. All right, a couple more to do and then we'll be in good shape. So you want to, part of what you're doing when you're putting together your skeleton is you want to be aware of sort of how our physiology works. So these are our shoulders or the clavicles, and they're going to connect up to the spine. We're not connecting to the base of the neck, right? Because we don't want the arms to go when the neck goes. We want the arms to go when the torso goes. So we're going to take this guy, shift select. This is spine 3, the top spine joint, and hit P. Parent that in. Same thing here. We're going to grab this guy, this one, hit P, parent it in. And we now have a complete skeleton. We grab the pelvis here, and we rotate it. The whole skeleton moves, right? Now, the problem is it's not doing anything to our character yet. That's the whole point of doing this, is we want to be able to take one of these joints and rotate it and have our character move along with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to skin this character. We're going to add a skin to that. And there's a skin menu set right here. The way we're going to do this is we're going to select the joints first. And you select the pelvis because that's the parent of everything. Shift select the character model. And then under skin, you're going to go to bind skin and the option box. And we've got some options here. So bind a joint hierarchy, which is what we want. The bind method, there are several bind methods we can use. Closest distance Maya will take a look at where the joint is in relation to the vertexes on the model and determine which joint should influence that particular vertex. Maya gets it wrong a lot. It's not really good at guessing because it doesn't know, like you name things elbow, wrist, etc., etc. Maya doesn't understand elbow, wrist, etc. It's just a name that you're giving to a joint that has a job to do. So when we give it those names, that's really for our purposes. Maya gets it wrong. Fortunately, we have tools to fix it. And we'll talk about those next week. So closest in the hierarchy is kind of the same thing, although it takes a look at the hierarchy and says, okay, so this vertex right here, is it closer to the clavicle or is it closer to this joint? Occasionally, it might take this vertex and stick it up here on the neck because it thinks that the neck is actually closer if we use closest distance. But closest in hierarchy will look at the hierarchy and assign things that way. Heat map is an interesting one. It looks at the joints as if they are heat sources, like a heater you have in your house. And there's a fall off for the heat. So it's the hottest right by the joint, and then it gradually tapers off as it moves distance away from the joint. So what heat map does is it looks at all the joints and determines which one is closest to a heat source and then assigns it to that one. And it'll compare different heat sources. And if this one is like 50% and the one next to it is 55%, it'll assign it to 55%. And I'm just pulling those numbers out of the air. There's no way to see that. Skinning method, usually classic linear is the way you want to go. The other thing with heat map is sometimes it will cause some binding issues, like it'll make things vanish or it'll send them screaming across your scene. Anytime that something like that happens, all you need to do, if you look at it and go, oh my God, what the heck happened? You just go to skin and unbind skin, and you're detaching the skeleton from the skin, and you can try a different technique. Normalize weights set to interactive is what we want. This area right here is very, very important. Max influences is the number of joints that can influence any particular vertex. Just like our blend shapes are a comparison of a vertex's point in space, what the joints do is when they rotate, they influence vertexes. Joints only influence vertexes. They don't influence faces. They only influence vertexes. So max influences is the maximum number of joints that can influence a particular vertex. In a lot of cases that won't matter, but there are some places where it will. The hand, for example, you've got a lot of joints in a hand. There's, all kinds of finger joints and wrist joints and all that. And like I mentioned a few minutes ago, Maya frequently gets its hooking up of vertexes to the joints wrong, and we have to go in and fix it. When this is a high number, like 5, five's a pretty high number actually. That means that 5 particular joints can, if this vertex right here, that one right there, can be influenced by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 joints. So that means anytime I rotate any one of those 5 joints, that vertex is going to move some, greater or lesser extent, depending on how strong the influence is. I've talked to a ton of professional riggers. They all tell me the same thing. You do 2 things in this area. You take max influences, you turn it down to 1, which means that for any particular vertex, only 1 joint can influence it. Does that make sense? So when you rotate, if you've got this, you get this vertex here that I was just talking about, set max influences to 1, then only this joint will be able to influence it. If I click on this joint and rotate it, the only reason this vertex would go along is because of the hierarchy of the fingers. If I click on this thumb over here and rotate it, this vertex won't move at all. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. The other thing you want to turn off when you turn max influences down to 1 is maintain max influences. You're going to turn that off. Make sure it's unchecked. The reason for that is if you leave it checked, with max influences set to 1, that means that all any vertex can ever be influenced by is 1 joint. And what we're going to do, the reason we're turning it down to 1 is to get all of our influences in one place for a particular vertex. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take them out and spread them out using a painting technique that I'll show you next week. You don't want to have maintain max influences on, because then you can paint away all you like. The minute you leave that joint, it's going to take all that weight and just put it back where it came from. It's kind of like your mom, your significant other, whoever, coming in cleaning up after you. You got all your stuff laid out and you're ready to work on the dining room table, and then you go off to do something, and they come in and go, oh my God, what is all this stuff? And they pick it all up and they take it and put it somewhere else where you didn't leave it. Where did all my stuff go? It was all set. Oh, I cleaned it for you. You're welcome. And then, then fighting ensues and yelling and recriminations, and it's just ugly. So make sure that when you go to max influences 1, you turn off maintain max influences. And then everything else is fine. Colorized skeleton is always fun. It just looks kind of cool. Let's zoom out on this guy. There we go. So again, pelvis selection, shift select the cage, the mesh model, bind skin, settings like this, hit bind skin. It'll think about it for a sec. And then the model turns purple. That lets us know that the joints are now influencing this model. And if I come and I grab this elbow joint and I rotate it, now I'm moving the character. Or I can come in and I can get the neck joint and rotate the neck. or I could get the spine joint and rotate him over, and he's going to town. And this is our last step. This and the weight painting that we'll talk about next week. These are our last steps before we start animating. So if you're creating your own model and you're still working on it, still modeling it, I would encourage you to finish quickly because it's going to get quick from here, and there will be a little bit of time built in so you can kind of catch up, but you don't want to rely on that because you never know just how much you're going to need. But so this is with a heat map bind. It actually does a pretty good job. There are some things that need addressing. You can see here that when let me turn off X-ray real quick. Turn that off. When I rotate his elbow, the geometry folds into the upper arm, and we don't want that. We'll fix that next week. But it's got a pretty good, we're having the same thing happen here on the leg as well. Joints. There we are. Yeah, same thing's happening here on the leg, where the leg is kind of poking up through the back geometry. And there are fixes for that. I mean, you've never seen this in a DreamWorks film or a Blue Sky project, but we can fix that relatively easily. It takes a little bit of work, but it's relatively easy to fix. So there's our skinned character. He's ready to go, more or less. We still have a little bit of tweaking to do. We have to adjust the influences so that things deform nicely, and then we have to hook up some controls to him so that we can animate him more easily. And I'll show you how to do both of those things next week. The other thing that happens next week is our midterm. What? Yep, we are halfway through the semester, ladies and gentlemen. So we'll have a midterm. It will be, that was good timing. We'll have a midterm. Crash. It's 20-question quiz, true, false, multiple choice. It's all on basic Maya functionality. I'm not going to ask you what's Paul's middle name, because nobody knows. But yeah, it's all basic Maya stuff. The other thing about the quiz is it is open book, open notes, open software. So it didn't used to be. We used to have everybody shut everything down and then take the quiz. And then I went back after class into my office and walked in and looked and saw that I had a bookcase full of reference material. And I went, wow, you're a jerk. Reference material is a big part of working in this field. You always need to, you can't keep all this stuff in your head. The more you use a tool, the easier it is to remember. But, there are things that you only do periodically. And Autodesk is really good about moving stuff around and renaming things. So you're constantly relearning stuff or looking things up. So I realized a while back that you guys should, since I have reference material in my office, you guys should be able to look stuff up too. It's not about, these are all the questions that are on the quiz are things that you should know cold, but if there's one or two that kind of stump you, you're more than welcome to look them up. Sound good? Fair enough?
Fair.
All right. So that's putting in your skeleton. And again, because I'm feeling a little sketchy tonight, that's about as far as we're going to go. So the rest of the evening is yours to do with as you will. If you want to hang around and work on stuff or have me look at something, I'll be happy to come around and do that. So the rest of the time is set aside for you for lab time, and I will do my best to maintain until you guys are done, and then I will drive home and fall into bed.
Thank you.